Well, listening audience and viewing audience, if you're streaming live, welcome back to another Guns and Mental Health podcast. We are always grateful that you choose to take time to spend it with us because you could spend it literally anywhere else. And so it's always humbling to have people listen to what we have to say. So thanks. And if you find it interesting, please share around and get other people to listen because that's how we make Earth better. So I'm Jake Wiskerson, and I'm joined by Mike Sedini as almost always. Sometimes I'm not here, sometimes you're not here, but you're here.
That's right.
Good morning. And
Good
Rachel
morning.
Moss, who is not in Nevada, she's in Arizona. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. And it's not the first time we've had an attorney on the show, probably won't be the last, but we really appreciate any opportunity to hear from a legal perspective because I think a lot of us don't really get to rub elbows with professionals too often simply because professionals tend to be busy and they tend to like charge a lot for their time. So
Yeah,
so
lawyers
getting
are also just really annoying. So
yeah, sometimes yes, but as much as we curse them, we definitely want a zealous one on our side when necessary. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, because the guests always do a better job than I do. Tell us who you are.
of course, so I'm Rachel Moss. I'm a criminal defense attorney at the Attorneys for Freedom law firm. We're located in Chandler, Arizona. I've been at the law firm for years. Actually, I started there as a law clerk. So before I was even a licensed attorney, they had me slaving away at the firm. And eventually, I became a licensed attorney in the state of Arizona. I do everything from the low level criminal speeding cases. Yes, speeding can be a crime sometimes, all the way up to felony murder cases. So we get to do a lot at our law firm. Overall, our firm is very passionate about fighting for freedom. It's in the name, Attorneys for Freedom. And we also are known for our Attorneys on Retainer program. So I'm also involved in that side of things. So Attorneys on Retainer is a self-protection program for gun owners. And overall, other than being an attorney, I just love being involved in the Second Amendment community as an advocate.
Mike and I are gonna go down to Scottsdale, I think. Right? Scottsdale? Is that where the conference is being held? Somewhere in
For
the
the first ever Attorneys on
Phoenix
Retainer
Metroplex.
conference.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we get the privilege, the honor, the distinction of presenting, and I'm excited about that. So maybe let's start there with Attorneys on Retainer, because that's really the link and how we're tied in here, and then we can go to Attorneys for Freedom. But tell us about Attorneys on Retainer. I think it's an awesome program. Or
I
Mike?
want to just jump in. You're also the first Sun Devil to be on this show, which is an
No, you
honor
are.
for me. Well,
No,
I
you
am
are.
the first. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm the only Sun Devil on the show. But you went to ASU, so I'm glad you're here, because I feel like sometimes ASU gets a little bit of a bad rap. I know all my friends bust my chops about all the movies and the references to ASU, but now we have somebody that you're fighting for freedom. You're an attorney. See, it's not just all guys like me that go to ASU.
Hey man, at least ASU has a rep. Like
I,
University of Nevada doesn't even like pop on anybody's radar.
this is true, and the greatest thing about her story, though, with ASU, like when I was watching your bio video, you're like, yeah, I accidentally took a law class, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and I ended up becoming an attorney from it. I went to law school, and I'm like, wow, that's the complete opposite journey that I took at ASU. I never accidentally took a law class. I took like a history of music class or
Mhm.
so it's just an awesome story. No, I'm kidding, but it's awesome to have you on here.
No, yeah, that very much a true story. I accidentally took a law class, and that's how I decided to apply to law school. I applied, I think, months before the semester was scheduled to start at ASU and got in. And then even from there, I didn't even want to be a criminal defense attorney. That was never a big dream of mine to do criminal defense. I was actually afraid of public speaking. And during my first year of law school, I actually forced myself to do a public speaking an oral argument competition because I knew later in the year I would have to be graded on it. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to have to do this for a grade, let me get out the fear and do a competition now. And the competition ended up being my favorite thing I've ever done. After that, I joined mock trial, loved it, and I ended up thinking, oh, maybe I would be fine going into court rather than just reading contracts. I thought, I'm already passionate about all of these issues related to criminal defense, so maybe this is something I can do. I did my first internship in the criminal defense field, and then really got started from there. But I know you wanted to hear a little bit about attorneys on retainer.
Wait. Let me interrupt real quick, because before we go that direction, I'm very curious. The therapist in me wants to know, what if you wanted to go into law and you didn't picture yourself in a courtroom? What did you picture yourself doing that didn't involve speaking, like working behind the scenes,
I
researching or
was so
something?
excited to be like drafting contracts. That sounded like a good time to me. I wanted to be drafting contracts, working on trademark applications, things like that,
Oh
where it sounded
boy,
right up my alley. I know. I mean, if we want to dive into that, we can. But
they make so
um,
many movies about those types.
oh yeah,
No, they
exactly.
don't. No, they don't. Anyway, yes, please continue.
Yeah, but Attorneys on Retainer is a really exciting program. It's really, I think, changed the industry. So, Attorneys on Retainer is a self protection program for gun owners. So, if you were to be in a self defense incident and you were a member of our program, we would be able to cover all of your legal fees for your criminal defense case, as well as if there's a specific civil defense case as well. And that includes before you're even charged with a crime. So, if, for example, if you have a self defense incident where you have to discharge your firearm, and it actually is not even limited to firearms, it's limited to any type of self defense with your fist. If you do, if it's assault by deadly tissue box, you are able to use our program. And so, I really enjoyed being a part of it. And one of the biggest things I love is really that 24/7 emergency line that we have, because I'll take calls at 3 a.m. Normally, I'm not a 3 a.m. person, but if I get a call at 3 a.m. from one of our members, I'm ready to jump on that call. I know it's important. And we are able to get working on that case right away. We're able to sometimes even get investigators out to a scene while the scene is still active. And I've seen that make such a big difference on cases. And I think that's what sets us apart from some other programs, is that we're a law firm and that you're going to be connected to an attorney within minutes of your self-defense incident happening.
Yeah.
Do,
So for me, like one of the biggest questions after I saw you at Goals, right? I was just on your podcast. You had me on the podcast. It was awesome. Um, and I remember like walking around and people had saw me on the podcast and they were kind of curious, and everyone had the same question. What's the difference between them and say USCCA, right? And I think you just kind of made that pretty clear. It's like you're going straight to the source of having an attorney right there. Am I correct in that, or?
Yeah, exactly. So if you call our 24/7 emergency line, first you're going to you're going to be in contact with a representative. And really that representative is just there to get the initial details so they can patch you over to an attorney. So usually from the time you call in, it's going to be within a couple minutes that you're connected to an attorney. And in my experience, those minutes can really matter in a case, because with some of the other programs, you might not be speaking to an attorney until after you're potentially arrested for that self-defense incident. Here, people typically call us literally minutes after the self-defense incident occurs. We're able to give them advice before officers even come to the scene. I've been on emergency calls with our clients where they call me right after the incident happens and they say, I know police are on the way right now. So I'm able to prep them for what's going to happen for when the police get there. And I've even had clients hand the phone to the police so I can talk to the police directly at the scene, and I could say, hey, I'm their attorney. I would like to be involved in this process. And one like kind of funny story, I feel like, without giving very specific details to maintain client confidentiality, one funny story I had was I had someone that was involved in a self-defense incident. They called our hotline before police arrived. And then when police came to the scene, he did exactly what I described. He handed the phone to the police, and I was talking to them. And he said that the officer at one point had started to write a citation for him, and he saw the page that was labeled citation. Then after I said something to the officer took the page off of his pad, opened a new pad, and just wrote a warning instead. So it was crazy to see, just on that one phone call, it was able to make a difference having an attorney there while the incident was kind of still ongoing.
I have so many questions, but I want to start with the investigators. Are these like private investigators that are locally sourced? Is that it?
Yeah, so we have a network of experts and attorneys across the country that we work with. Because if I'm only licensed to practice in Arizona, so if I have a case that comes up in another state, I'll need a local attorney to practice with there. So we have local attorneys throughout the country, but we also have experts throughout the country that we work with. And sometimes these are experts that we have found on our own, and then sometimes these are experts that our local counsel in our network have referred to us. But I've had cases where our experts were able to go to the scene while it was still active, and it makes a really big difference. So these are people that you'd kind of think of like an investigator, like you described, that they're just going to learn more about what is going on. And a big example I like to give, again, not giving too many specific details, is I had a self defense case where we sent an investigator out to the scene while it was still active. And the police had actually wrapped up their interviews on the scene. And our investigator was able to find a witness that had not been interviewed by the police. And it actually was the only eyewitness. The other witnesses the police interviewed had only heard the incident, they did not see it. And they found the only eyewitness to the incident. And that eyewitness was able to say that it was a self defense situation. And otherwise, this incident would have, my client would have had no corroboration to what happened. So finding that eyewitness was huge. So that was one of those incidents that really opened my eyes to how important just having an investigator ready to go is.
This is really fascinating to me, and you're really selling me on the program. It's no secret that we're partnered with USCCA. We love them. They provide a lot beyond just their defense advising stuff. There's the Protector Academy and all sorts of resources. But so I don't want to like conflate the two or say that we're fighting or stepping on toes. But I really appreciate that level of detail. And I'm a big fan of license reciprocity for many different professions. I don't think that your professional competence stops at the geopolitical border of your state. But explain to me how, like, you mentioned you're only licensed in Arizona, right? So I would presume that you'd only take 3 a.m. Arizona calls, or is there some exigency that covers that in an emergent circumstance, or where you're allowed to operate just for a short period of time before handing off? Like, how does that work?
No, you're spot on right there. You actually hit on exactly what allows us to do that. So typically, I'm only supposed to give advice to Arizona residents or individuals that are experiencing an incident in Arizona. However, the ethics rules allow us, in the event of an emergency, to provide legal advice. So that will cross the bounds of state lines. And so if there is someone in California that is going through an emergency, I am able to provide legal advice in that situation to them. But once the emergency has passed, that is when I will need a local counsel involved in order to practice along with me. They basically kind of sponsor me in that state at that point. But typically, in those first few minutes, hours after a self-defense incident, it's very clearly still an emergency situation where we're able to give legal advice. But there are times that people call into the Attorneys on Retainer program where it's not quite an emergency situation, because we will offer discounts on our services for non-self-defense incidents. So every once in a while, we'll have someone say, "Hey, I got into a DUI a few days ago. What do I do?" And in that incident, we'll have to tell them, this is not an emergency. We're still able to offer you our discount. We just need to connect you with some local counsel. This is advice that our local counsel has told us to give in this situation. So while I'm not able to give legal advice, if I've specifically addressed these questions with that local counsel in the past, and at this point, we've talked to local counsel in all 50 states. So we know generally the advice in each state that a local counsel would give. So we're authorized to share what those states' local counsel have told us is general advice they would give in that state.
That leads into my next question. You sort of answered it, which is, to be more precise, but you've basically been briefed on the laws in different jurisdictions. But does your professional liability insurance cover you if you give bad advice in that emergency circumstance? based because you were just ignorant to whatever California did, because California's got different rules and regs.
Yeah, so again, because we are allowed to give advice in the case of emergency, that would extend in that circumstance. So we have no problem, giving legal advice in those emergencies.
That's pretty cool. We need something like that for my profession, I think, and I believe it exists on a lot of the hotlines. But it would be nice to get a little more depth and breadth, than just. And I don't want to throw them under the bus, because they're great people. The volunteers who are trained on, say, the 988 line, they're not licensed practitioners in most cases, which affords them the ability to intercede in those types of situations. But I think it would be great to spend a little more time with a licensee, perhaps, and move forward. But that's neither here nor there. It's for another time and place to have that chat. Mike, you look like you were leaning in there.
No, I'm just listening. It's kind of a fascinating. So how do you recruit other attorneys to be in this sort of network around the country?
Of course. So we have a fantastic owner of the law firm, Mark Victor. He's a lot more well known than me out in the field. He's been practicing for over 30 years, very specialized in these types of self defense cases. So our owner, Mark Victor, and the partner of our law firm, Andrew Marcantel, who Mike, you met at Goals, they really take the lead in that area in recruiting these local counsel. And we start by we actually they come through in a variety of ways. Some of it is just pure research on our part, looking in every state, who are the people that do the best in self-defense cases. Sometimes we get a referral from someone in the freedom community that really likes a law firm, or someone in the gun community that really likes a certain law firm, and and do our own investigation from there. But for us, we've really been mindful about the fact that we're just not trying to settle for finding an available attorney in your state, or an attorney that is willing to work for an affordable rate so we can keep our costs low. As much as I love to save and make money, it's really important to us that the attorneys we work with support our same values of freedom, but also really like self-defense cases. They like gun cases. They're not people that say, okay, I'll defend someone in a self-defense situation, but in my personal life, I'm fighting for all these gun restrictions. No, we want people that are passionate about these types of cases. We don't want to settle with who we work with. So that is Mark and Andy's priority as they, network with these local councils throughout the country, interview them, and decide whether or not they join our network and our program.
So Attorneys on Retainer is its standalone program, but it's nested within Attorneys for Freedom, or how's that work?
Yeah, so Attorneys on Retainer is through the law firm.
And you are a member of employee of one, a member of the other. Is that how that structures?
So yeah, I'm an employee of Attorneys for Freedom. So by extension, also an employee of Attorneys on Retainer. I'm also, I guess, a client of Attorneys on Retainer as well. If I have a self-defense incident, they are obligated to cover me as well. So I feel great about that. I actually get a lot of comfort from being an Attorneys on Retainer member, because I always think about what it would cost me otherwise if I had to pay for a criminal defense situation out of pocket.
So let's move that direction. Attorneys for Freedom. And I love the phrase freedom community, because I think in this very polarized political time that we have, there seems to be less of a distinction between right and left, more of a distinction between authoritarian and liberty loving, I guess you could say, because the lines seem to have been blurred. The terms liberal and conservative don't seem to mean much anymore. Conservatives aren't conserving much at all. Liberals are like, wait, we're not like the people you hear about who are, angling for control. So I like freedom community. That's very cool. But what is Attorneys for Freedom then?
So Attorneys for Freedom, we've been a law firm out in Chandler for a long time. Like I said earlier, I started there as a law clerk, but we handle both criminal defense cases as well as do civil litigation and personal injury cases. So we have that side of the firm. I'm firmly in the criminal defense side of the firm, where we do misdemeanors, felonies, and post-conviction, including appeals. And at our firm, we are more than just about just working a case. We also like fighting for freedom in general. So Mark, when I was hired, actually on his website, he had a freedom pledge, and he didn't require every employee to sign the freedom pledge at that time, but he did say every attorney has to support the freedom pledge, and he really cared about having attorneys at the firm that cared about fighting for freedom principles. Because for us, we actually look for cases where we can advance freedom, where we can do creative motions to get rid of bad laws or fight on certain types of crimes. And this where it's important for us to stay, consistent in how we fight for freedom.
There's I think a long-standing image, I guess, that defense attorneys are not necessarily for freedom. They're
Mm-hmm.
for something else. I don't even know how to quantify it anymore because I don't know that, like I said before, the parlance even matters. It's ill-defined these days. But you're a criminal defense attorney, and traditionally, I can imagine people maybe of my parents' generation. I come from a family full of cops who all despised the defense attorneys because they thought they were in the right. I got this bad guy and he's not going to jail because the defense attorney screwed it up or whatever. But innocent people get accused of crimes too, and
Mm-hmm.
I would want a zealous defense attorney on my side advocating for my freedom, particularly if I wasn't guilty. So is that the motif then?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you brought that up. That, funny enough, defense attorneys aren't always known for supporting freedom, and I think that's crazy, frankly. And it's mainly, I would say, when I was looking for a job in this field, when I saw attorneys for freedom, I was shocked. It was kind of a dream I had in my head during my later years of law school, that I could work for a law firm that had freedom values, but I never thought it was possible. Because most defense attorneys I had met, and a lot of public defenders included, while they are very passionate about fighting for someone's freedom from being convicted of a crime, they're very passionate about keeping someone out of a cage for a crime they're accused of. They were not ideologically consistent in fighting for freedom across the board. And a common example I would use is many defense attorneys will think, oh, we shouldn't throw someone in a cage because they chose to use cocaine, because they chose to use meth. That's their own prerogative if they want to use cocaine or meth. But at the same time, they would turn around and look at someone who chose to exercise their Second Amendment rights, carry a firearm, and say, it's outrageous how easily we let people have firearms in this country. It's outrageous that they didn't have to pass a background check to get that gun, or they didn't that we allow private sales in Arizona, that you can gift it to someone else without filling out a form. And they get really passionate against the Second Amendment community, and they're not willing to stand up for those same freedoms. So it's very common for defense attorneys not to fight for Second Amendment or First Amendment freedoms of speech. And for me, I found it important to be ideologically consistent across the board. That yes, I want to fight for someone's freedom to help them stay out of a cage, but I also want to fight for their freedom to carry a gun. I want to fight for their freedom to freely speak. So all of those things are important for me. And I think defense attorneys should embrace freedom principles in general, because I think it only helps us do our job better and be a more effective advocate.
I don't want to make this binary, but if we flip that around, does that necessarily mean that prosecuting attorneys are not fighting for freedom? Or I mean, it seems to me they're fighting to uphold the enforcement of the law, as we all agree to by the social contract or whatever. Am I making it too black and white?
No, I don't think so. I think we want everyone fighting for freedom, and I think there's kind of two types of freedom here. I think we're talking about in general the freedoms in terms of your constitutional protections, Second Amendment, First Amendment, and then there's just your general freedom of staying out of a cage. And I guess those two things can be conflated at some points. But there are certain people that, in my opinion, need to be imprisoned. There are certain crimes that prison is a justified punishment. And so why, as a defense attorney, I'll fight for their freedom, I'll advocate for their freedom. I think a prosecutor is also fighting to protect other people's freedoms by, if they find that someone is so dangerous as to be required to be held away from society, if someone's crime, for example, murder or rape, is so dangerous that they can just not be amongst the people at this time. I think that is fighting for freedom in a way, protecting the freedoms of other Americans. So in my fantasy world, I would love if prosecutors and defense attorneys all keep in mind freedom principles while they're doing their job. But I think there's different aspects, different ways you can fight for freedom.
How did you figure out what freedom meant to you, right? Because like there's some point it clicks for everybody. It clicked for me later on in life, right? Like I started to see things differently. You know, when I was younger, I was like, you know, if we can give this up, we can give this up. But like, what is your story? How did you, you know, fall in love with the idea of freedom? And then also, how did you kind of get into the Second Amendment? I know you said you were shooting, but like part of freedom comes with being able to carry a gun, Second Amendment, defend yourself, defend your family, or you defend your community if need be. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I think I had an interesting journey to getting to where I am today. So I did mention to you before we started filming that I started shooting at a young age. It was actually my grandfather that taught me how to shoot. I think it'd probably be what some people could say would be a controversial age to start learning to shoot. I think I was 4 years old the first time I shot a gun, but it was, it was like shooting little tin cans with a rifle, outside on my grandfather's farm. It wasn't anything crazy. And from there, I mainly learned how to shoot rifles growing up. And I actually didn't learn how to shoot a pistol until I was an adult. But when I was going to college, I was interested in the idea of possibly carrying a gun on campus. So while I went to ASU for law school, I actually went to college in Virginia for my undergraduate degree. And very well known, there was a shooting at the Virginia Tech campus. And that was just a few years before I started college. And being in Virginia at that time, knowing a lot of people that went to Virginia Tech, that had a big effect on a lot of people. And, like anytime there's a deadly shooting, you have the one side that will say, oh, let's get all those gun restrictions out. And then there's the other side that says, this is proof of why we need responsible gun owners armed with guns. And I fell on that side. I felt going into college that there is a risk to being in a classroom without protection, because there you are sitting in a room where you're not in an ideal defense position, when you're just sitting in a classroom. And I thought, it would be great to have that opportunity to be able to carry a gun on campus. I looked into it. On my campus, you weren't allowed to carry a gun unless there was like this really weird exception where you could have a gun and you could leave it with the police, like the campus police. And then if you wanted to like go shoot on a range or something or take it off campus, then you could go get your gun. So you couldn't really have it on campus. So I wasn't doing that because my interest was having it in class as I walked around campus. And I had an incident that I feel like is very common among women in particular. I feel like a lot of women have an incident that makes them feel this way. But when I was in I forget if it was my freshman or sophomore year of college, there was a time when I was walking home alone from a friend's apartment. And I know a lot of people say you shouldn't do that, and they're probably right. This is probably an example of why you shouldn't walk home alone at night. But I was doing that, and I was just walking to a bus stop. It was actually just like a 5-minute walk from my friend's apartment to the bus stop to get to my dorm. And along the way to the bus stop, I saw this young woman running out of a house, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. I look around, no one else is around on this dark street. And she's running out of the house screaming for help. I'm the only person around. And then, within 2 seconds, I see a man run right after her, running after her for help. And I didn't even really have time to think, to really process what was going on. But I saw a woman screaming for help. So naturally, the thing that goes to mind is you got to help her. So I run up to where she is, and she sees me and starts to run to me as well. And we run up together, and the man keeps following her, keeps running, and he's trying to grab her as she runs away. And I have to step in between them, push the man away. And then the woman tries to run a little further away. Oh, I think I hit my microphone. Are you still able to hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, sorry, I like bumped it. So the woman, is still trying to get away, and the man actually tries to swing at us and get physically violent. And luckily, he had a bad aim. We were able to successfully get away. But at that point, I realized, okay, this is literally what people are talking about when they say fight or flight. I have to make a decision here. Do we run? Do we fight? What do we do? And it was very lucky at that moment, I would say, that a group of young men rounded the corner. And these were exactly the kind of men you'd want to see in this situation. Nice, tall, strong young men that immediately got involved. As soon as the guy saw these men coming around the corner, he actually backed off without these men really having to do much other than just walk towards us. And it was, for me, that was a very scary incident. The other people that came to the scene actually called the police, and I was in such a weird state. I actually just walked away after those people came. I said something to the woman, like, I hope you're okay. She was crying. The other people started to help her, and I just walked away because all that was in the back of my head was, I need to get on the bus. Like, I need to make the bus home. It was the last bus of the night, so that was the only thing I could think about was, it'll be bad if I don't make the bus home. I didn't even think about, I could probably get a ride from the police or, call a friend. In those incidents, I think most people aren't really thinking clearly after something like that. And so after that, that was really scary for me. And I always cite that incident as, looking back, I was not injured whatsoever, no physical injury to me. Everyone ended up being okay. I actually had police contact later related to the incident, and they informed me everything was okay. The woman got help. They were really able to assist her in this situation. And I've talked to people where they hear my, this story, and they say, oh, well, this is an example of why you don't need guns. Everything turned out fine, in your incident. And I always look at them and say, I'm able to tell my story of what happened here. A story that I acknowledge is not nearly as hard and traumatic as many other survivor stories. But I'm here to tell my story because I lived. And unfortunately, there are so many women out there that were in a place where they followed the law, were not carrying a gun because the state told them they were not allowed to carry a gun in that area. And they are not here to tell their stories. And that is why, people are missing that gap of those women that unfortunately are not here to tell their stories of why they did need a gun and why a gun would have made a difference, because there were tragic endings to their stories. And to me, that is so heartbreaking. It is so tragic. And after going through that incident, even though I was pro-gun before, it made me realize, there's a difference between being pro-gun and liking having a gun and shooting a gun, and actually fighting for those rights to have a gun. And from there, I became really active in getting involved with, certain political campaigns and advocacy organizations to fight for Second Amendment rights. And that, again, inspired me once I got to law school. And I had that experience, going through, okay, maybe I could do a job where I'm in court, that I realized criminal defense is an opportunity to continue fighting for those rights. And being at Attorneys for Freedom, I've loved having the opportunity, finding cases where I could fight for Second Amendment values.
Yeah, that's a really, so that story really resonates with me. And because I got to share a story about ASU. When I went to ASU, so I was on Mill Avenue one night. This is in the late 90s. This is back in the day when you had a pager. You just remember that? Someone pages you, you got to go out and find a payphone. So I go outside of the club that I'm at, and I'm calling back the person that paged me, and there's a couple, and the guy was massive. He looked like the dude on the Green Mile. He was massive, and there was this little girl, and they're arguing, and I'm watching this on the payphone, and all of a sudden he just pops her. She goes flying. I'm on the phone. Now, keep in mind, I'm not the size I am now. I was like 180 pounds, and this guy's huge. So I'm like, I got to call you back. Hang up the phone. And now I'm struggling because I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, but I'm thinking also about my family and how my grandfather and my uncle would kill me if I didn't come to aid like a lady that just got hit in the face. Like they would have killed me. So I walk up, and like I kind of push the guy, and I'm like, bro, it's a female, it's a woman. Like, what did you do? He starts to push me. Now I'm like, this is gonna hurt because there's no way I'm beating this guy. He's just massive. As he pushes me, two ASU football players, and one of them I knew really well, who is a lineman. His name is Vince Amy, by the way, are walking out of the club, and they see him push me. And he goes, what's going on, Mike? And I said, this dude just hit this girl. She's on the ground. She's out. You know what I mean? She's rolling, like, because he hit her straight in the face. Vince goes up and just rolls this guy. It was perfect, right? But that's an instance where I'm a man, you know what I mean? Or I'm a young man at that time. But I could have been seriously hurt trying to defend this person. I was going to do it regardless. But, you know, I think people underestimate that it can happen to anybody. You know, it can come into play when you're just trying to do the right thing in life, you know, because the guy obviously has anger management issues. Who knows where he is today, but that's somebody that could do some serious damage. And what he did to that lady's face, you know what I mean? It was probably going to happen to me after, you know, and having a firearm at the time, that was out of the question for me. It wasn't even in my, you know, world back then, but that's a perfect example of a time when it would have probably been better to have that safety plan, not use it and need it. But I'm trying to de-escalate the situation. So I really appreciate what you're talking about, because I can't imagine. I know how scared I was. I can't imagine. It's like, you're like, we're two small girls, like this guy who knows what he's on. You know what I mean? He could have, like you said, he could have been methed out coming out of the, you know, that room.
Exactly. And what I always like to tell women is that I know there's this attitude, you know, today that, you know, women and men can do everything the same. And I don't buy into that ideology. I think men and women are very different, and it actually enhances our safety if we acknowledge those differences. And one of those differences is women are not as strong as men. It's just a fact. And studies show that even a smaller man is usually able to overpower a woman that is larger than him just because of his strength. And it does women no favors if we pretend that those differences do not exist. And so I always keep that in mind. And that's why I encourage a lot of women that even if you're not comfortable with carrying, you know, have a plan, be prepared in some way, or at least be familiar with firearm safety, at least consider it as an option. Because, you know, a lot of people will describe it as an equalizer between men and women, and it's true. It is really an effective way to potentially protect yourself in a situation where even if you're trying your best in fighting, you know, it may not be enough.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, and I detected a should in there, and you know, maybe going back in the recording will reveal that I'm wrong and my ears didn't hear it correctly. But I think I heard you say walking home alone in the dark is something you should not do. And that in itself is problematic for me. If we're talking about freedom, and there's a lot of gun control people who will say the freedom from, and then they'll follow up with whatever they think their freedom from is supposed to be about. Freedom from violence, in this case, requires an awareness and a safety plan, sometimes involving a firearm. But what about, like, how about the idea that there's a narrative that suggests that we're not supposed to be out by ourselves? Like, that is completely anti-freedom. And in your situation, you even inadvertently found a buddy and we're still in danger. So even grabbing a buddy to walk to the bus, oh, and by the way, the buddy has to walk back also by herself, doesn't serve the narrative that we just need to get rid of all self-defense options. Yeah, that blows my mind that's out there as a viable alternative in some people's minds. And I can't help but think, I haven't read the book, but I know enough about it that Rob K. Henderson talks about these luxury beliefs, and it's like, if you espouse that belief, that's a luxury belief, and it indicates that you really don't understand or have not encountered or expect not to encounter a situation such as that, and you're living in a bubble. And I think that when you're talking about defense attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, policies, laws, regulations that go in place that prohibit people's ability to defend themselves as they see fit, flies directly in the face of that freedom. Like, we should be free to choose as we see fit, because the people who are not interested in following those rules and regulations and laws have the freedom to violate them. So where's the equalizer, right? We have to acknowledge reality. We can't just pretend reality doesn't exist. And I think you're making a really strong point there, that simply washing this away and saying that, guns are the problem doesn't do anybody any favors. We need to acknowledge that there's a very complex humanity around us at all times. And as long as humanity's been walking the earth and civilization has been what it is, you're going to encounter violence at some point. So we have to have a robust idea about how we're going to counter that. One of those ways is free speech too. And I know that you mentioned that before and alluded to it. The idea of being jailed or put in a cage, because I like that terminology better, for speaking something that somebody else doesn't like, is a very chilling proposition. And we're seeing it in the United Kingdom right now. It's happening right now. And if we think that that's not going to come on our shores, yeah, woe be it to us to turn a blind eye to that. So maybe we should spend a little time talking about how much you're seeing in the realm of defense attorney world where you are, in the form of advocating for free speech and First Amendment stuff. I know this is a Guns and Mental Health podcast, and we talk a lot about the Second Amendment, but the old saying says, the second defends the first, or second protects the first. So without the second, we don't have the first. We don't have the ability to practice religion as we see fit, gather as we see fit, protest as we see fit, and speak even digitally as we see fit. How much of that stuff are you guys seeing?
That's so important, because we do, more than you'd think, actually bring up First Amendment arguments in our cases. And so a big example that I think back to very early in my career is, I had a misdemeanor case where, in that case, he was charged with disorderly conduct, and the whole case stemmed from him yelling a curse word at another individual. That was the extent of the disorderly conduct. He wasn't flipping over tables. He wasn't, berating someone and refusing to walk away after being asked to leave. The whole case boiled down to him yelling a curse word at another individual. And when I was working on this case, I wrote out a long argument. I researched all of this case law, trying to negotiate with the prosecutor, because in my head, I thought, there's no way the prosecutor reviewed this case all the way. If he charged it, he must have just seen the police report, issued the charge, and hasn't really dived into it yet. And then when I really looked into it, he had a full understanding, but he thought that conduct was outrageous enough to constitute disorderly conduct. And it got to the point where we actually set this case for trial. And the day before trial, the prosecutor ended up dismissing the case. I think he was hoping, he was trying to call our bluff and thinking we were going to take a deal at the last second. He knew it was not a winnable case, but it's sad to me and scary to me to think there's a prosecutor out there that thought yelling one curse word one time at someone else was enough to constitute a crime in the United States of America. And that's an example of where I was ready to fight this case for as long as I needed to. If I couldn't comprehend losing it at trial, but if I lost at trial, I would have never let this case go in appeals. And then the other major place I've seen this is in injunctions against harassment and orders of protection. And this is a way a lot of people actually will lose their gun rights in Arizona. Is if someone gets an injunction against harassment or order of protection against someone else, they can actually ask the judge to take away their gun rights as well. And the judge can order that during the length of the order, they are not able to possess firearms. And it's somewhat similar, to a red flag law, but it's not mental health related. It's related. For an order of protection, there has to be an act of domestic violence, where an injunction against harassment relates to harassment against someone that's not a family member or intimate partner. And sometimes for these types of orders, the only type of allegations that the plaintiff will have against the defendant in these cases is words that they said against them. And it will be things like he, was sometimes it's just simple speech that the other person didn't like. And so they're arguing that the speech they didn't like qualifies as harassment. And I will acknowledge that there are some actions that can definitely be harassment. And I agree that harassment can be a crime that can be charged. But when you're relying on only speech that you do not like to constitute as harassment, I believe it's a complete violation of the First Amendment. And we've actually gotten certain orders dismissed because we found that it has gone too far to violate someone's First Amendment rights.
This is where I get to get really weedy and nerdy because I like seminal documents and I'm a geek that way. It's sort of a part-time job of mine. And in my profession, it has direct relevance because I operate with a license given to me by a licensing board under the authority of the statutes and the regulatory codes of the state of Nevada. And our ethics are embedded by reference into the regulatory codes. Now, there's some disagreement about whether or not that's appropriate, because if the ethical codes from one organization somehow frame in a way that I disagree with, and that's why I don't belong to that professional organization, I don't know that the state has a compelling reason to force me into compliance with the bylaws of an organization to which I don't belong. But that set aside, the harassment thing really bugs me. And I pulled up the Nevada Revised Statute definition of harassment because I want to make sure I was clear on this. And it reads, without lawful authority, the person knowingly threatens, and I won't get too deep into it, to cause bodily injury, to cause physical damage to the property of another person, to subject the person threatened to any other or any other person to physical confinement or restraint. So far, we're physical, right? Bodily. But then subsection A4 reads, to do any act which is intended to substantially harm the person threatened or any other person with respect to his or her physical or mental health or safety. And then which gets to be, the person by words or conduct places the person receiving the threat in reasonable fear that the threat will be carried out. So now if I can birdwalk this a little bit, if I'm the recipient of words that threaten my mental health, and I have reasonable fear that it will be carried out, I can now allege a crime that could jeopardize my career for sure if it gets to the licensing board level. But to the random person who doesn't have a license, you're talking about words affecting mental health. And those terms aren't very well defined unless we start leapfrogging statutes and talking about mental injury as defined under child abuse statutes and that sort of thing. But for my license, if I post something that somebody doesn't like, say about a diagnosis, I'm very popular in saying, well, I don't know if I'm popular, I shouldn't say that. I like to think that I've popularly said that mental illness can and will be overcome, or can and should be overcome. It's the tagline at the opening of our podcast. Some people don't believe that. Some people think that, once ill, always ill, forever. And I sharply disagree with that, because if it were true, my profession wouldn't exist. No one could recover. No one could rehabilitate. Setting that aside, there is a contingent out there that can claim that I'm somehow threatening them and causing injury to their mental well-being simply by saying, hey, you can overcome this thing, and posting it on X or whatever. And they can take that to the licensing board and say, this is unprofessional conduct as defined by my ethics. Now, so far, most licensing boards have defaulted to professional conduct is only in the professional setting. It's not in the public setting. But it wouldn't take much to stretch into the harassment statute and bring a case against me for daring to craft hope and opportunity for people who are struggling with mental illness. And then suddenly I'm facing a licensing board issue and a complaint that then, if upheld, jeopardizes not just my career, but the career of 19 other people working for me, and all sorts of ripple effect, including more insurance policies and maybe being uninsured if I still continue to carry that license, and on and on. How do we stop this from happening, or how do we balance the very legitimate concern that some people have? Because we all know that psychological abuse is a thing, and I work very closely with the domestic violence community to prevent that from happening. I see it happen in children all the time behind closed doors in their homes. Proving mental injury to a child due to threats of the parents or constant beratement or even coercion, which is another statutorily defined term. It's not to be thrown around loosely. How do we balance this? How do you guys in your realm balance it without saying, nope, free speech, it's just what it is. Sorry, 14-year-old, you're just going to have to endure your dad's, condescension. And the overly sensitive person who's just got it out for making chaos in another person's life because they can't tolerate distress. Like, how do we balance that? What's the process in court? What have you seen play out?
Mhm. I think that's definitely a hard question. I think it's hard to strike that balance, but it's important to work at protecting those freedoms first and foremost. In court, it kind of depends if we're in criminal court, if we're in one of these like orders of protection, injunction against harassment situations. Um, because it's often the judge is making a determination, for example, in these orders of protection, injunction against harassment cases, about how the other person felt about this incident, or how a reasonable person would feel based on the speech or the actions done by the other person. And sometimes I worry about that standard, because if it's based on another person's feelings, I think that's a situation where we might be getting in a bit of a danger zone there. That if we're really saying, okay, this is how this person felt from this harassment, then we're opening it up to unreasonable people dictating
Right.
these laws. But that's why we do go back to the reasonable person standard. The reasonable person standard is supposed to be an objective standard, even though it's a little more squishy than the law likes to pretend it is. um, but I think it's one of those things that it really will depend on judges enforcing the law properly, because I have seen judges make decisions that I think are absolutely shocking and contrary to the law, and then I see judges that are really listening to what the law is and even enforcing it when they don't disagree with what the law says, or sorry, when they themselves disagree with what the law says. So I think it really comes down to judges making sure they are following the law, following that reasonable person standard of whether the speech arises to something to where it's I a way I like to put it is that I feel like it has to be speech plus something else for it to constitute a crime. It can't just be a statement you don't like. But if it's a statement you don't like and the person refuses to stop saying it to you after you said, hey, please don't come to my house and yell this at me every single day, that's where it becomes a bit of a crime. If it's speech plus trespass, if it's speech plus a physical action, if it's speech plus a threat, then we're getting into that realm where I think it rises to the level of harassment or potentially some other crime. But when it's just a statement you don't like, that is what judges need to be mindful for, that they're not punishing people for making a statement that the plaintiff just didn't like.
Yeah, I don't want to overblow this. But I am very acutely aware that our society seems to be tending more toward, less distress tolerance and more narcissistic centering of self on the thing. It's like, Jake was definitely talking to me with that tweet that he put out. It's like, I don't even know you existed, right? So I think it's like, speech plus target probably also matters too. If you're purposely targeting a group or a person with this conduct that is going to be offensive, that may beget a more close scrutiny or examination. But are you seeing the reasonable people are disappearing? Like, is our standard shifting?
I sometimes worry about that myself. And it's just instances like the cases I've described that you would never think that someone would be annoyed or go so far as to want someone to be prosecuted for a crime just because the other person yelled a curse word at them. But yet I've seen that. And there are many times in my career that I have seen things that I can't even imagine how it made it through an officer, how it made it through um, a a prosecutor and then is potentially going to trial. Um, and this stretches beyond just like free speech. I think there's just a general encroachment into freedom and um, like basically allowing people to dictate again, like you said, that selfishness. I have a case where someone's charged with it's actually the crime of barking dog. Their dog was barking too much and they are being criminally prosecuted because their neighbor said they were barking, that the dog was just barking too much. And I did an interview with the officer that did the citation in that case. And I asked him about the fact that my client was actually a, through circumstances outside of his control had a health crisis and was not able to be at his home during that time. And it got to the point where the officer said, "That doesn't matter. You're still responsible for your dogs." And I asked the officer another question. I'm like, "Okay, well, this is just a hypothetical, but um, if my client had been in a coma and it was through no cause of his own, he was in a coma and he wasn't able to monitor his dog's barking and the neighbor said that the dog's barking was annoying, would you have cited them?" He's like, "Yes, I would cite them for that because the barking annoyed the neighbor's dog." And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this was an answer I got from a police officer in the state of Arizona on a recorded interview. And it's instances like that throughout my career that I remember that make me think that it's not just speech, it's not just guns. There are so many incidents um, where people are able to encroach on freedoms, and there's just over regulation in the government, and we see this all the time, and I'm shocked every day of my career about some of the things that I encounter. But that's why I do what I do. That's why I fight these cases because I want prosecutors, officers, judges to know that this is not something we're just going to accept. If I think this is a bad law, I'm going to file a motion stating that this is a bad, unconstitutional law that we should get rid of. So that's something that our firm likes to do is we like to take on those cases and we like to file creative motions, and that's what's fun for me.
I mean, I guess you got to give him a hat tip for logical consistency in any case. I mean,
Right? He's obviously not a dog person. I have a question. How many people do you get? So I went through a really messy divorce years ago, and I want the listening audience to understand that I have a really great working relationship with the mother of my children today, right? But divorce gets dirty. You got everything's fine until everyone starts getting in your own head or your spouse's head, right? Like you need to do this, you need to do that, and she knew I owned a gun company at the time, and her new boyfriend did too. And I remember because I could see the playbook a mile away. Like they were like, "Hey," like every time if I said hi to them, they were like, "You're making me feel uncomfortable." Like so I saw what they were angling at. They were angling at like let's destroy his livelihood by attaching him, because when you own a gun company or you work around firearms, if you have any slight something off, you could be removed from your job. You could lose everything.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen. Do you have a lot of those types of cases where people are going through, like, say, a divorce, and they're using a gun angle against the person?
I have seen cases like that where sometimes I've seen people basically falsely accuse someone of a crime to assist with another case, like a divorce case or a child custody case is actually really common. And even going back to the orders of protection and injunctions against harassment, I see that as well, where they will get an order of protection or injunction against harassment out against someone, knowing that a judge will pretty much grant them no matter what, um, and know that it's pretty hard. It's actually a very low standard to get one, and they'll use that to help their child custody or divorce case as well. And it's very common that guns will come up in these cases. And it's shocking to me the way that judges will so quickly take away someone's guns in these orders of protection, injunctions against harassment, or even as release conditions in a criminal case. Because, for example, in an order of protection or an injunction against harassment, they might say, this person has harassed me, and I know he owns a gun. But they never say he's harassed me with the gun, or he's threatened me with the gun, or he's shown any semblance of physical violence. But often it is enough to say this person has harassed me, and then he happens to own a gun, as enough to take their gun rights away from them. And I feel like that is a judge not following the law, because under the law the judge should only be taking away the firearms if there's a credible threat to the other person's safety. And we've seen this actually discussed pretty recently in the United States Supreme Court. You might be familiar with the Bruin decision. It was a really big United States Supreme Court decision that really changed the game and has paved the way to potentially take down a lot of bad gun laws. But we're seeing the fact that the court standard may have not been clear to all of the lower courts. And so a lot of the cases based on Bruin are making their way back up to the Supreme Court now for review. Recently, we had the Rahimi case. And Rahimi was actually a case about domestic violence restraining orders. And the court, the Rahimi, the plaintiff in that case, was actually arguing that he should that he should not lose his firearm rights just because he was subject to a domestic violence restraining order. So he was saying that that law that allows your guns to be taken away when you're subject to one of those orders is unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court actually found it is constitutional to take away someone's guns if they're subject to a domestic violence restraining order. And they found that because it's mainly because there is a historical analog, if we go back to the time of our nation's founding, that they basically argued that at that time, if there was someone that also posed a credible threat to public safety, we would take away their firearms. And Justice Thomas, he's I would say the guy I usually like writing my Second Amendment opinions on the Supreme Court, he was actually the dissent in that case because he argued that the historical analog wasn't very close. But I liked the fact that at least the Supreme Court emphasized the fact that why it's okay to take away people's guns in that case is that they posed a credible threat to public safety, and that the restriction is only temporary. And so it's not saying that you can have a lifelong restriction on you for your firearms because of the domestic violence restraining order. So I think there are ways that the court analyzed the decision correctly. But I did like Thomas's point in his dissent that he really emphasized the fact that these types of hearings often have a much lower burden of proof than in a criminal case. So for orders of protection, injunctions against harassment hearing, the plaintiffs only have to prove their case by a preponderance of the evidence. We usually call this like 50% and a feather's weight more, or more likely than not. And this is a much lower standard than beyond a reasonable doubt. And I always encourage people to think about that. Are we okay with taking someone's guns away from them because they more likely than not did something? Or should we take someone's guns away only when they've committed a crime and been found guilty of it in a court by a jury of their peers beyond a reasonable doubt? And I actually think that's a tough call, and I can understand how different people can have different opinions about that issue. But I think Thomas made a great point about how willing we are to take people's guns away in these situations.
Does Arizona have a ERPO law? Extreme risk protection order? The red flag?
No, sorry. Yeah, no, we don't have a red flag law in Arizona. We only, really the only similar way to take away those like those gun rights are through like order of protection, injunction against harassment, where sometimes I see people using the mental health angle, or kind of making similar arguments that you would see in a red flag law type of hearing in these types of cases, but we don't have a red flag law in Arizona.
So
Well,
what you're
trying,
outlining,
but
yeah, well,
Mhm.
everybody is, right?
Mhm.
What you're outlining there is exactly why I am opposed to red flag laws, is because the burden of proof to enact that restraining order, the protection order, we call it the extreme risk brand of protection order, is a preponderance of evidence on the petition as the judge sees it. Now, the petition can come in Nevada, and most of them are carbon copies of each other, except for a couple of outlying states where there's different stuff. But it's reasonable suspicion by the family or probable cause by the police officer or law enforcement officer, and then the judge takes the petition and says whether or not there's a preponderance of evidence within that petition. So you can actually enact a protection order revoking somebody's civil liberties and human rights based on reasonable suspicion from a family member that they're going to create harm to self or others with the firearm. But to restore rights is actually clear and convincing evidence in Nevada, which is the top of the burden of proof ladder. And I think that's horrible because it's woefully
Mhm.
disproportionate. Not only that, but like who defines clear and convincing evidence other than a judge? And the judges historically in these cases that I've heard of and seen have no idea other than to appeal to a mental health professional to evaluate the person, and none of us are equipped or trained to do so. So it's not temporary at all. It's quite it's quite full of longevity, and they can go up to a year. In
Mhm.
most cases, it's usually like 7 days initially, and then the extended order can go up to a year. That's a long time to go without liberty, and certainly when there's no due process involved. And they'll say, well, the due process is on the back end. It's like, no, no, no. We need due process before rights restriction, not when we're considering restoration. You can do the ex parte thing. You can act in exigent circumstances. We already have stuff on the books for that. My personal opinion, clinically, is that if somebody's in that level of a crisis where they're a threat to self or others, I don't care what the object is that they're going to use to perpetrate the harm, they need a higher level of care. They don't need their property stolen from them by the state. That's totally out of bounds for me. Not to mention that the law enforcement officers enacting the order have no idea what to do with said property once they once they retrieve it, because it's not a crime. It's a status offense, right? So it's rife with a whole bunch of landmines. But to your point earlier, that's exactly what the proponents of these orders will say, is that we live in Minority Report. I had a reasonable fear to believe, therefore throw the person in a cage or keep them away from me or whatever it is. And sometimes that's probably fair. And I think we already have laws on the books that say arrest the person for threats. That's what a threat
Mhm.
is. There's your harassment, there's your coercion,
Exactly.
there's your stalking or whatever it is. In Nevada, there's assault and battery are two different things. Assault is the threat to carry out with the intent and ability. Battery is the actual perpetration of it. Um, why do we need ERPOs when we already have everything we need? We have the tools at our disposal. I don't understand why we'd be putting people in more danger by sending the deputies to their door to steal their property. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. And another thing that really worries me about these laws are that currently across the country, I would say most of the laws we see of this nature, the petitions to take away those guns have to be filed by law enforcement or a prosecutor. But we're already seeing this expand in
Yeah,
states
Colorado.
where it can be colleagues, it can be family members, and I think it's not going to be long until we see people pushing for even further expansion of the law where there doesn't even have to be some closer connection. It could just be any person could accuse another person, file one of these petitions, and I think it's just ripe for abuse in the system. And I think it's outrageous that people are going after these laws again. I think you were dead on correct when you said there are already ways to handle these issues in our system, and these red flag laws are just promoting unsafe practices and will potentially be abused in the future by people that are using this as a revenge tactic, or people that are just anti-gun.
Yeah, and you are right. Colorado just last year enacted an expansion of its own ERPO law, which includes people like me in my profession. So it's mental health, medical, school personnel, including educators, school counselors. So you can imagine how that might go down at a contentious IEP meeting with divorced parents sharing custody of a child, and one party doesn't like the other and uses the firearm angle to enact an ERPO. That's super, super dangerous. And there's other states kicking the tires on expanding their own ERPOs. New York's already done it. They call it the New York Safe Act. They don't call it an ERPO law, but it's a different mechanism, different structure altogether. But and that's where getting back to the point of why we even have this podcast and why we have these conversations is that firearms owners are afraid to seek care because they don't want me picking up my bat phone to .gov and tattling on them. I don't have a bat phone to .gov, but in Colorado I could. And when we're talking about suicide prevention and somebody's ailing enough to seek counseling and they finally get up the courage, why would we want to enact a barrier to that care by saying, you might actually lose the thing that's keeping you alive because you love going to the range and that is how you off gas. That's how you decompress. That's how you deal with your anxiety or your post-traumatic stress or whatever it may be. Why would we take away your best coping skill because somebody is scared and doesn't understand of their own ignorance? Like, hello, we're causing harm. And oh, by the way, I don't know of a state where the suicide rate has gone down since they enacted an ERPO law. There aren't any because we've all gone up across the country. Even Nevada, which went for 1 year, we stayed flat. Yay us, I guess. But we haven't seen a precipitous drop. They don't work. And I would make the argument that it's actually keeping people away from care. And if these researchers who think that red flag laws are doing all this magic for keeping people healthy and alive would bother to put some money into research, finding out whether or not they repel people from care, I think I'd be proven right. But so far, the money doesn't seem to be flowing that direction for that type of research.
Mm-hmm.
Soapbox over. I'm off now.
Yeah. I was going to say too, just kind of talking about weaponizing these things. I had alluded to my ex-wife and I having a really good working relationship. We're friends now. And I remember asking her at the time, like, I was like, you know me, like, where did all this come from? And she had said her lawyer had come up with the idea of let's hit him with all these things. like let's hit him with all these things. Basically admitting, hey, let's throw a bunch of stuff at it. Let's see what sticks. Let's see if we can get them to break. Right. And at the time, thank God I could afford a good lawyer and I could defend myself. But I remember at one point saying, why am I constantly the one who has to prove everything? I had to prove I was a good father. I had to prove all this. I'm like, when does she have to prove anything? But like, that's the scary part about it. And this is why when, I'm always open for discussion and especially nuanced discussion with anti-gun people. But I always ask them, I say, hey, is there, have you ever been in a situation where you've been accused of something you didn't do? And most people in their life have been in that situation. And it's like, they don't think about it from that negative aspect. It's like, you're only putting the red flag law in the most positive light. Like the person's like, I'm going to blow my brains out, and I always ask people that endorse red flag laws. I'm like, in your research, did the person admit that the red flag law stopped it? Or did you just jump to that conclusion yourself? Because like if someone said, yes, I was going to go down to the local supermarket and shoot a bunch of innocent people if you guys didn't red flag me. Thank God you did. That's the guy I count, right? I need to hear it from the source. Because I've seen in the past people who have been red flagged and they said, absolutely, it was unjust. And here's what happened, right? Even David Anastasi, one of our most famous red flag stories that came on the show, his father said that was a misunderstanding. He stood by it. And later on, when he was able to tell his story, I kind of saw it. I was like, oh, wow. But people were trying to be safe. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well,
it's such a difficult situation.
Mike, you touch on a great point about you were able to afford a good attorney. So many people can't. So many people can't. And some of them are the same survivors of domestic abuse or or they escaped a narcissistic abusive relationship. And along with that, they lost all their assets because the the aggrieved party was the breadwinner, right? And they took it with them, and they're continuing to go after the now, separated spouse. It's not just the impoverished communities. It's the apparently well-to-do communities who just don't have any more resources to throw thousands of dollars at a defense. It's really, really bad. And I think there's a ton of unintended consequences from these types of policies.
I completely agree.
Well, we're getting up on an hour and a half now. I think we should
Yeah,
probably
I was just
start
saying,
wrapping.
we could probably argue this stuff all day.
Talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're wrapping up here, and there's one question I like to ask every guest. It's always great to see the different answers, but there's no right or wrong answer for this. But how do you tend to your mental health?
I love this question because I feel like in the past, when I was younger, for me, one of my biggest issues was just, um, and I don't think it rose to the level of being any sort of like diagnosis or anything like that, but just general, anxiety, just letting worries really get to me. And I would say I'm religious, and so a big part of it for me has been prayer and having certain Bible verses that I read in certain situations to really, bring me peace and remind me of that aspect. But actually, funny enough, since we've talked a little bit about Attorneys for Freedom and Mark, our owner Mark Victor is really into Stoicism, and I feel like we've talked a lot about stoicism over the year together, and I've seen it actually have a very positive aspect or effect on my life in applying some of those stoic principles to my life, of realizing the fact that there are things that you can control and things that you can't control, and I shouldn't waste time on the things that I cannot control. And it's gone so far, I would say, as to have a big enough impact on my life that family members have even noticed. Kind of a weird example that I've given recently is earlier this year, my entire apartment flooded, and I had a lot of like furniture items damaged. And I called my mom like right after it happened because I saw the flooding start, and I actually had to leave for a court hearing. So I just kind of left my apartment as it was flooding, let my apartment know, and they said they'd deal with it. And I called my mom and just told her what was happening, and she's like, "Rachel, I've never seen you so calm, about a situation like this before." And I was like, well, I realized it's something I didn't cause the flood. I can't control the flood. The apartment's going to deal with it, and if things are damaged, things are going to be damaged. That's what it is. And then this is what makes the story really funny to me, is that my apartment flooded again 2 weeks ago, twice in 1 year. Twice in 1 year, my apartment flooded, and I'm like, that's so crazy for it to happen twice in 1 year. And this time was a lot worse. This time, I have to move out of my apartment. Pretty much all of my furniture, most of my clothes, all of my shoes, my designer bags I love so much, all damaged. And again, it was a situation where a combination of the things I described, where generally this would be something that like I would be thinking about all day long. I would, when I was younger, this is something that I know would have affected my ability to do my job or things like that. But I did all those things I described. I prayed, I read Bible verses that were meaningful to me, and I reminded myself. We at our firm we call them stoic challenges. That these situations are opportunities where you can really grow and learn from them. And it also like I kind of embracing it like a challenge has made me like feel like, oh yeah, I'm handling this well, and then it kind of like that also brings encouragement to me. And so throughout this situation, I've been applying all those things. And so that has been a combination for me, for my mental health, and addressing the things that have been more difficult for me in the past has really worked for me.
Rachel, you are demonstrating there what we often preach, which is we're not, even though we're a suicide prevention organization at our core, we're not interested in intervening at the time of crisis. That's lots of other organizations do that. We're interested in getting upstream from it to keep people healthy so they never slide into what Mental Health America calls stage 4. You're doing it, right? And people are seeing it, and that's really, really awesome. And I think that is a great way to model for everybody else how, because they always want to know how do you stay calm? How do you do, right? So that's a great way to model the how of staying healthy. My question though, is what are a couple of those Bible verses?
Oh, I think I actually there aren't necessarily, I would say, like ones I read every single time, but um for me it's just going onto my Bible app. I think like a lot of Christians, I have the YouVersion app, and I'll just type in really what I'm feeling. I'll describe what I'm feeling in that in that instance, and describe just the fact that, like, am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling worried? Is there something I'm concerned about? And I feel like our apps have gotten so much more advanced nowadays, where I can find a verse that really applies to that specific situation. But there are certain verses that I return to um, over and over that do bring me comfort. One I always think about is the verse regarding the ravens, and the ravens. God will watch over the ravens, and if God is going to watch over the ravens, birds on the earth, um, how much more is he going to care about me? How much more am I valuable to him? And I think about that, the fact that he knows all the hairs on my head. He knitted me together while I was in my mother's womb. That is how much care my creator has for me, that I know I'm being watched out for. And I always just keep in mind the fact that God has a plan for me. And I always say, I may not like the plan. It may not be the plan I would have chosen for myself, but just knowing that it is part of his plan is, again, something that brings me comfort. And I know that, as a believer, it's my job just to, in any situation I'm in, strive to bring glory and honor to God. So that's the kind of general, I believe I would say that carries me through my life day to day.
That is a way better way to end this show than just a few minutes ago when I was ranting and stabby about ERPOs. Thank you for bringing that back
I like
around.
both.
Ranting and stabby has its place, but not to end the show. We don't want people going away into their weekend depressed and anxious. Thank you. This has been great. Mike, you got anything else?
No, I was just thinking, Jake, when she's telling her stories, I'm like, Mr. Emotional Functioning over here can totally relate to this, because I've seen Jake in some situations where I'm like, dude, I'm surprised you stayed that calm. And you literally are like, I teach emotional functioning for a living. Like, were you not getting emotional functioning vibes from what she was saying?
Yeah, 100%. It's
Yeah,
awesome. It's being in tune enough with yourself to know where your limits are and to, ask for help if needed, let go when required. And, hey, designer bags and clothes and furniture, they're not ours anyway. You can't collect your mana. It rots. So,
Mhm.
thanks for that. I look forward to meeting you in, what is it, October we go down there? November?
Yep.
November. Yep. October is something else. We got a different presentation, but thank you very much. I appreciate you making the time, and I'm sure the bill will be in the mail, because you attorneys always bill by like every 6 minutes or something.
That's what I do.
Thanks, Rachel.
How do people find
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, give a
people that are
plug.
interested in the program?
Yeah, so I always encourage people to check out attorneysforfreedom.com. That's where you can learn a little bit more about the firm and our team. And then you can also check us out on attorneysonretainer.us. That's where you can learn all about our self-defense protection program. And I always like to say, I think it's important for any gun owner to have a self-defense protection program. Of course, I'm biased. I would love it to be us, but if for some reason we're not the right program for you, I think it's important just to have any sort of program in general. But another fun place to check us out is on YouTube. Our Attorneys on Retainer YouTube channel is really fun. You'll see the interview that Andy and I did with Mike back at the GOA conference. So I encourage you all to check us out there as well.
And on that note, we thank you all for listening, and downloading and streaming. We ask you to share it around and help other people who may be in need. And with that, we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.